Hey everybody, I'm Howard Tiersky. Welcome again to the Winning Digital Customers Show. Today, let's talk about change management. Does it really work? I think you could find a lot of people who've said that they've participated in one form or another in change management programs. And while well-intentioned and clearly responding to a real need, they also are classically plagued with a lot of challenges. So let's talk a little bit today about change management, why we think we need it, what are some of the problems with it, and what is a better way? That's what we're going to talk about today on the Winning Digital Customers Show. So first of all, there's no question that we live in a time of change. More than that, we live in a time of transformation. The world is changing faster than ever. Our customers are changing faster than ever. And the companies that will thrive and succeed in the future are those that are able to transform and adapt themselves to the needs of this new world that we're in and the ongoing changing needs of customers, as well as frankly respond to ever improving customer experiences that are being delivered by our competitors. And so companies need to be changing a lot. And so the idea of change management, presumably somehow helping organizations change, would seem to be more important and relevant than ever. And it is, but I think that what we classically think of as change management has problems. And I think I've had the opportunity to observe many organizations undergoing different types of change and transformation. And I think there's a better way than this, first of all, than the classic thinking around change management. And secondly, maybe there's a better term than this term change management, which may send our thinking in the wrong direction. So let's dive in. So what do we typically see when we look at change management? What is change management, right? Well, typically what happens within an organization is someone starts by making a decision. They decide we're going to change something, right? We're going to move the call centers to India, or we're going to, digitize a component of our operations, or we're going to restructure the organization in a different way. Whatever the change is, the first step is typically somebody's made a decision to drive some kind of change. And then once that change is decided, there's the next classic step of change management to say, well, we need to communicate that change. Let's make sure all the key people who are going to be impacted know the change, ideally feel positive about the change. We're going to want to communicate this in some kind of an upbeat, positive way to get people really loving this change, which we've decided is going to be, a part of their lives, or this change that they're going to be undergoing. And then the next thing we do is we have to implement whatever the change is, right? So it may be a change of process, technology, roles, whatever that may be. So we've got the process and technology that we're going to implement. And then very often there is some sort of structural component, a human component, right? Meaning we're going to redo the org structure. We're going to put different people in different roles and possibly provide some kind of training. So in other words, we're trying to help people. We're both changing the way the organization operates as needed to adapt to this change, and we're helping people learn any new skills or whatever else they need. Classically, there's the cliche, change management workshop sessions, right? People are asked to go to change management training. And I don't know if you've ever seen the episodes of The Office where change management training is provided. While perhaps a little bit of an unfair caricature, I think there's a lot of truth too in the fact that those who've had to sit through change management training usually don't have super positive things to say about it. And then finally, there's some kind of reward or review process, meaning we've implemented changes. Some people are going to thrive with the changes. Some people may resist them or may not do well. So we're going to modify the way we're going to reward people. We're going to modify the way that we evaluate performance, which is what I mean here by reviews, to make sure that people are motivated, presumably, to go along with the change to make the change work. So this is kind of, one version of classic change management thinking. And of course, someone out there might be in this space and quibble with the categories I have here, the way I've approached it. I'm sure there are different people who approach change management in various ways, but I think this is kind of the basic vanilla approach to change management. And on one level, who can argue with it? Doesn't this make sense? You're going to decide on a change. You're going to communicate it. You're going to sort of change whatever processes or technologies are needed. You're going to change the org structure if needed. You're going to train people in the new way, and you're going to make sure they're rewarded if they sort of go along with the new, and that they're going to get critical reviews if they don't. So logical, but often doesn't work that well. So why? Well, the first thing is, and this may be a little bit unfair to the world of change management, but that first step of change management to decide on the change, classic change management kind of assumes, well, somebody's decided on some kind of change. That's sort of almost before the change management starts. And now we are going to manage the change. In fact, though, there's a lot of reasons why that often doesn't work well. How confident are we that when a decision comes out of the boardroom or the executive suites of our organization, that it is, in fact, a good decision to begin with? And I think that's the first problem that many large organizations have with today's approach to change and change management, which is if the fundamental decision behind the change isn't well made, and I'll talk a little bit more when I talk about a replacement for change management. If it's not based on reality, if it isn't made with an understanding of what it's really going to take to adopt those changes, things like that, then the rest of it is for naught, right? Because presumably you're making a change to drive some sort of business improvement, and you may actually not get that result. So that's one problem. Then come the communication. So change management communication is easy to caricature. I like this cartoon, someone's trying to create, the change management dog. Change can be rough, spelled RUF, and obviously, again, a silly exaggeration, but certainly I've seen many efforts at change that just presume that if you just come out with kind of a cute, fun spin on the change, that people are going to, embrace it with open arms. The truth of the matter is that most people naturally resist change. This is why you need change management, right? And we've talked about this on the show many times and talked about it with many experts on my podcast as well. The natural human instinct for probably 80% of people is to, once you've kind of got something working for you, you got your job, you know how to do it, you got your salary, you get your weekends, you don't want to mess with it too much. Someone comes along and says, hey, great news, we're changing everything around. That rarely is considered good news for people. And frankly, sometimes it's not good news. Depending on your role, depending on your job, the change could represent major opportunity for somebody who has the appetite to jump in to do something exciting and new, even if it requires a lot of learning and adaptation. But there's other people for whom the change may really not be good when they come to you and say, hey, we're going to outsource your job to India. And then just but hey, here's a fun slogan and how great it's going to be for the business. It's not realistic to think that people are going to just adapt to that. Now, you may think that I'm kind of caricaturing this, but I want to tell you a little bit of story about my own experience. I worked for a large company called Ernst & Young. Many of you probably heard of it. And I'm trying to remember exactly when this was, somewhere around 2000, give or take. No, it's probably more like 2002, 2003. The consulting division of Ernst & Young, which I worked for, was acquired by another company. That company is called Capgemini. Now, these are both great companies. I have no general quibble with either of these companies, and they are, perfectly normal corporate transaction for a company to sell a practice or a part of the company, basically a division of the company, to another company for all kinds of reasons that, of course, had nothing to do with what I did on a day-to-day basis, which was work with companies on digital transformation. I was part of a company of 50,000 people or something. So fine. My division was sold to another company. Now, when they did that, they employed all kinds of change management strategies. Let me say I had nothing to do with these strategies. I was working with our clients, but I don't know if it was someone internal at Ernst & Young and Capgemini, or they hired an outside change management consultant. But in any case, one of the main strategies for the change management influence on the people at the company was to give every single person in the company, I think it was, at least in the US, at least 10,000, probably more people than that, a copy of this book, Who Moved My Cheese? Now, why would they do that? Well, first of all, I'm going to explain what this book is. You may be familiar with it, but one of the reasons why people were resistant to this model was that Ernst & Young was a partnership, still is a partnership. And so a lot of people were working very hard who were earlier in their careers with the goal of trying to become partners. And now not everyone was going to become a partner, but in a partnership, whether it's a law firm or a consulting practice, there's this sort of model where, you kill yourself, you work a ton of hours, you work really, really hard. As you get more mature, you start to bring in business, manage your own projects. And eventually if you're successful, you become a partner, and at least that picture is painted to you of that's the ultimate success. Now you're a partner in the organization. Now you're going to share in the profits, and sort of your career is set. That may have always been a little bit of an overpromise, but in any case, the problem was that Ernst & Young Consulting's practice was being sold to a public company. It was not a partnership. So if you were in the consulting practice at that point, you had no opportunity to become a partner anymore. If you were a partner, you were no longer going to be a partner, a genuine partner in a partnership, because the company was not a partnership. It was a public company. You were going to get stock. You'd have some ownership, but it's not the same as being a partner in a partnership. And if you were not yet a partner and you stayed, which they wanted people to stay, you were never going to be one, because again, it wasn't a partnership. So as you can imagine, there were a lot of people who've been working hard for many years to try to get to this goal, who were, very, very disappointed by this decision to make this corporate change. And so they gave out this book, Who Moved My Cheese? And I'll probably do a disservice to the book by trying to summarize it. But essentially, the story of the book is, when you're a mouse and you learn to run a maze, like in a laboratory, and you learn where the cheese is, you kind of like it because you can run through the maze a certain way and get to the cheese. And when someone moves that cheese somewhere else and you realize you have to run the maze in a different way to get your cheese, it kind of annoys you. But what can you do other than learn to work the new maze and figure out where the cheese is now? That's basically what the book says. And so they thought, well, let's give everyone this book because hopefully that will help everyone feel better about this change because, we just moved the cheese. Well, I have to tell you that this was not well received. And every administrative desk at the company had piles of these books that were meant to be handed out to everybody. And I guess they sort of handed them out. They tried handing them out. But after a day or two, the trash receptacles of the company were filled with copies of this book. I don't know how much money the company spent, a couple $100,000, maybe more, I don't know, buying, what would it cost? 10,000, 15,000 copies of a book, cost like $20, whatever. Spent all that money on books, handed it out to everybody, and obviously, for very, very little positive impact. And so I tell you that story only to make the point that it's not caricature to say that companies are often led astray by following these principles of change management that say, hey, we just need to communicate and we're going to get people to adopt change. Change is very, very difficult to get people on board with, particularly when they have no part in it. They have no ownership over it. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But anyway, so that's a lot of just one example of how change is often communicated. Now, I'm not saying you can't do a better job than that under a traditional change management paradigm. I think you can, but I think there's a much better way. But let's just talk about something else. Let's talk about training, right? So a lot of times there's a change and then there's some kind of training, but what I've observed from my perspective, working in lots and lots of companies, is very often what you hear is, they've made this change and they sent us to a class. There was a one-day session or something, but if things change dramatically, you often find there's huge numbers of people who still feel at a loss for what they're supposed to do. They're asked to play roles that they didn't sign up for. They're not comfortable with, they're not familiar with, and they're not really prepared for, even if they got sent to a 2-day class or, sent a book or, given access to an online training program. So often in change management, what we try to do is, someone says, okay, people need to learn this skill. Let's spend some money and let's, license an online training program, or let's hire a training company that's going to come in and teach our people some things. But now recognizing that change isn't just about training people. It's about kind of a more fundamental internalized change that has to happen. And these efforts, again, very often fail, very often are not really appreciated. And so I want to suggest that we should be abolishing the concept of change management and moving to something more like what I might term transformational leadership. That the idea that the goal is to manage a change, that you're going to decide a change, and then you need to somehow, and this is why this term, I think, is also part of the problem, that as management, right, our job is to sort of make a decision and then get people to do what it is we want them to do. We're going to kind of conceive, here's how their jobs should change. We're going to hire very often outside companies to sort of figure out how do we get this change to happen? Like if it's a river and it's going one way and I want to get it another way, I hire a bunch of engineers and I sort of reroute the river and I sort of make the river change directions. Well, you know what? That sort of stuff can be very difficult because rivers are powerful. And I'm not saying it's impossible to change the direction of a river, but you don't want to underestimate the level of effort and the fact that the river wants to go a certain way. And you can do various things and dig things out and divert things and put up dams and walls. And again, I'm not saying it's not possible, but it's you're working against a very powerful force. And people's own sense of their own identity and their own sense of what they want to be doing is also a very powerful force like a river. And you don't want to underestimate this idea that you can just figure out a way to buy some training and come up with some slogans and send out some books and create change. Again, I could imagine that somebody who is an expert at change management might say, Howard, I think you're not doing full justice to all of the tools we have in our toolbox of change management. But with that, accepting that caveat, let me suggest there's another way. And this idea of transformational leadership, what is the difference? What is the difference between, am I just coming up with a new buzzword for change management? Well, I think to me, the fundamental difference is that the core philosophy behind change management is what and how. What do I mean? I mean, first, you figure out what's the change you want, and you figure out how is it that people need to change. In other words, this is the new software system we need to install. This is the new role definitions that we're going to create. This is the new organizational structure that we need. You figure all that stuff out, and then you execute it. You get the change implemented, and you persuade or force people to accept that change. And then you measure to make sure they did it. That's the classic main thinking behind change management. And with transformational leadership, it's much more about inspiration. I like to think about transformational leadership as not being about what and how primarily, at least not from the top, but rather about who and why. By who, what I mean is, who are we? Who are we as a company? What is our identity? Who do we want to be in the market? Who do we want to be to our customers? So if we think about something like digital transformation, a classic change management approach might be to say, we've decided to upgrade our SAP system. We're shifting, X percentage of our, revenue or revenue goals from retail stores to online. We will be reallocating some resources. Some of you will be reassigned to new responsibilities to pursue this new goal. People who are reassigned will be given training, and you will be measured on your success at accomplishing these new goals. Thank you. That would be kind of a classic change management mindset. Focus on what and how. This is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. Transformational leadership is more about, first of all, who do we want to be? You want to start, and the goal in part is to be more inspiring, to say, today our customers are yearning for more seamless, more digital interactions, and here's why, here's the background on that, and we want to be the leader in this. We want our customers to love us, to be so delighted with us that they wouldn't want to go anywhere else. We believe that as the premier brand in this space, or whatever it may be, that this is our destiny. And it may not be where we are now, but this is what we stand for. And this is who we need to become as an organization, as a team. It's not a description of exactly what you need to do. We're going to implement this system. We're going to change this organizational structure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's the aspiration of identity, and combined with why. Why is that important? And there may be many whys. In my book, Winning Digital Customers, I talk a whole section on leadership, and I talk about identifying the whys behind change. And I don't just mean whys in the sense of the Simon Sinek, start with why, what is the purpose of our company? But I mean here's a why, because our business is threatened by our competitors that are doing a better job. Here's a why, because our customers are dissatisfied and we want our customers to be delighted. And here's how, something that will cause them to be delighted. Here's a why, because we want to be working with the latest technology so that all of our skills are modern and we're learning exciting new things that this digital world allows, whatever it may be, right? And obviously, these are just examples. You're going to need to come up with that why for your own situation. But the idea behind transformational leadership, at least as I view it, is to let people know who you as a leader believe your organization should become and why that's really meaningful. And then let the organization figure out the other parts. If you look at great inspirational leaders who have driven significant transformation, whether it's JFK and inspiring the country and the government to fund and to execute a vision of putting a man on the moon, or Martin Luther King Jr. in his "I Have a Dream" speech. I did a whole live cast a few months ago for MLK Day where we dissected apart the Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech to show how it was brilliantly structured for inspiring people for change, and how even though for most of us the change that we're trying to inspire isn't nearly as lofty as racial justice, we can nevertheless learn from the structure of how he inspired people. Or even someone like Abraham Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address, or other writings or speeches by Lincoln, where he was striving for change and unity across a country that was deeply divided, very much the way it is today. These are leaders whose primary weapon was not making a decision about exactly how something should be done and figuring out how to legislate, how to force it on people, or how to demand it of people, or even how to bribe people into doing it, or motivate people into doing what his vision of the what was. But rather, it was more about the who. Who is it we need to be as a country for racial justice? Who is it we need to be as a country that is truly a United States of America, et cetera? Even Kennedy may have given you a kind of a what in saying we're going to put our man on the moon, but that was still a very broad type of what. And there was so much more detail that needed to be figured out. So if we go back to our model that we talked about earlier, we say that what change management does is decide, communicate, deal with process and technology, structure and training, and rewards and reviews. The biggest part of transformational leadership focuses on these first two things. And instead of deciding what we're going to do, you decide who we're going to be as an organization and why. So that when you communicate, that is what you're communicating, not the how and the when and how we're going to force you to do it, right? And then one of the things that I've learned through years of using agile practices in software development and product design is the power of empowering people. And we have a facility in New York called the Innovation Loft, where we conduct all kinds of corporate workshops. And what I see is that when decisions are made from the top, they're rarely high quality, no matter how smart the people at the top are. And this is not a criticism of anyone in a boardroom. I know I showed a few cartoons earlier that seem to mock, boards of directors and top-level executives. And of course, that's easy to do, but usually it's not because they're not super smart or even well-intentioned, but rather because no one is smart enough to figure out how to drive successful transformation of an organization. It takes an organization's intelligence, because all the nuances of how that transformation needs to work require understanding of the customer and the current systems and the processes and the technologies and the regulatory considerations and the real estate considerations and the partnership considerations and the contractual considerations. And it goes on and on and on and on. And nobody can understand all of that. And so instead, what you want to do is inspire the organization in transformational leadership so that, number one, they will solve the problem for you. The organization itself is told, this is who we need to be. Now, how are we going to get there? And let the entire organization roll up their sleeves and feel that they are a part of carving that path to the future, which gives you a double benefit. And the path probably does include changes to process and technology, changes to structure, training, rewards, reviews, and maybe other things. The whole customer experience, the technology behind it. And that's all great. It's not that you don't need those things. You do. And those are things that are going to need to change or transform. It's simply the difference between trying to define a change from the top and push it out versus define an identity goal and a reason from the top and empower and activate your organization to figure out the details. And there's a lot of specific techniques. And again, in my book, I talk a lot about different techniques for facilitation and ideation and brainstorming and prioritizing ideas. Because, of course, just because you inspire people doesn't mean everyone's going to have the same idea and immediately agree on the best path. I'm sure when the many companies that were involved in building the whole system that took a man to the moon and brought him safely back to Earth, there were all kinds of different ideas about what kind of rocket propellant should we use? How should the capsules be built? How should the life support systems be created? That's great. Instead of trying to come up with the decisions at the top, you empower teams to explore alternatives, to test them, to prototype them, and to figure out which are the solutions which are going to be most consistent with that identity that you have described. And so your communications should be focused less on essentially letting people know that this is the change and they better like it or lump it, which is kind of what the Who Moved My Cheese book basically said. We, the management, have changed the maze, and you, the rat. Can you imagine? This is a super popular book, by the way. It's used widely in change management, and it tells the employee, you are the mouse, you are the rat running the maze. I mean, I think it's just couldn't possibly be a worse message. Sorry to the authors of Who Moved My Cheese. I know they've written other books, The 1 Minute Manager and other things that are great, but I just really think this metaphor is the wrong metaphor for communication. It's not a fixed wall maze, and the employee's job is to figure out a new path to the cheese. It's an inspiring goal, and all the employees need to work together, because that's the other thing. A mouse or a rat in a maze is by themselves typically, but rather they need to collaborate and figure out how to get to the top of the mountain. And then that group will figure out all these other things. So that is, to me, the difference between change management. You're not really trying to manage the change. And, the whole idea of, from a vocabulary perspective, I think today we need more than change anyway. Change can be anything. Change can be small, but transformation is inherently aspirational. And I think that it's a lot easier to get people inspired about transformation than just mere change as well. It's also easier for people to get scared of transformation than just mere change. But again, the goal of the leader is to create such a compelling, inspirational identity and reason why that people have courage, because they recognize that even if they have fear, that it's a worthwhile outcome, worthwhile for the company, but also worthwhile for them personally and exciting to be a part of it. It's meaningful to their own identity to have helped pave that path. Because as I said before, and I'll just close with this, you really get two benefits from this approach. And the first is simply better ideas, which probably means a more successful vision, a more successful strategy, a more successful outcome. But also, when your teams are empowered and they feel like they are blazing the path, you get far less resistance to change. There's a truism that I've heard many times. I think it might have originally come from Matt Taylor, but it's that people resist change, but they support the change that they create or that they initiate. So a key strategy is to figure out how many people can you get to feel like they're owners or they're co-creators of this change. They're the ones who came up with these changes. So then when they're implemented, they're going to be far, far less resistant to them. So that's my suggestion to you. If you're engaged in change management, it doesn't mean everything you're doing is wrong, but I would encourage you to shift your thinking a little bit and say, what would I do differently if I thought about being a transformational leader instead of a manager of change? And that might mean you want to think about maybe shifting some things in your program, or maybe ditching your program entirely and rethinking it. And if you're getting ready to buy 10,000 copies of Who Moved Your Cheese, instead, why don't you buy 10,000 copies of my book, Winning Digital Customers? It's a much better book, and we'll give you a special bulk rate discount. No, I'm semi-kidding, but the bottom line really is be careful about the metaphors that you use and the language that you use when you speak to people, because you have the opportunity to inspire people about change or transformation. You also have the opportunity to really annoy them and make them feel dismissed, disregarded, not considered, and unwanted if you communicate in the wrong way about change. So it's a tremendous opportunity, but it's also a significant risk. So hopefully this has been helpful to you. As always, thank you so much for watching and listening. And if you have any questions or comments or downright disagreements, I would love to hear from a change management expert in the comments who wants to say that this is all full of it and wants to take the other point of this argument. I'd love to hear that. And I mean that sincerely. I welcome open dialogue and debate on all this stuff. And who knows? Perhaps you can persuade me that there's something that I've said about change management which is unfair, and that will help me learn too. So thanks again for listening. Have an awesome week, everybody.